Hey gamers, now unfortunately this review of The End of Time Part 2 was that long that it's had to be cut into multiple parts. If you want to know the true runtime, it's 1 hour 26, 13 seconds-ish. And the BBC weren't happy with that, so they decided to block the video, even though it's completely fair use. I used the 7-second rule, the same 7-second rule that I used for all of the reviews for Series 12, all of the reviews for Series 8, and the review at The End of Time Part 1, but they're not having it this time, so unfortunately I am going to have to put this in multiple parts. I don't know how many parts as of yet. I'm thinking 5, maybe? Yeah, disclaimer. Part 2 of The End of Time gives us some of the greatest scenes in all of sci-fi, and maybe even all of fiction. Everything that made the first part of this special, well, so special, is satisfyingly paid off in this epic finale enclosure to the 10th Doctor in his near-perfect era of Doctor Who. Everything that I praised in Part 1 is exemplified, expanded, and made even better in this part. The amount of character work done in this story makes this one of the greatest stories ever told. This episode starts on a recap of the previous events we saw in Part 1, and even this is just a perfect beginning to the story. Don't get me wrong, recaps themselves are nothing special, it's just a little reminder to the audience of what happened in the previous part. But for this one, they got Murray to make a new take on the strange creatures, and even a little bit of the Time Lord's last stand. And it's such a perfect little piece. It's only 53 seconds, but it conveys so much of what will happen in this episode perfectly. It establishes that the massive stakes the previous part promised are going to be paid off in a satisfactory way. The drumming in the Master's head, the end of time itself, the stuff with Donna, the Master race, and the fucking Time Lords returning. My God! And it has such a feel of culmination to it. This music represents the end of an era. The era of Doctor Who will be ended with a climactic, perfect bit of closure finishing off all that's been set up since all the way back in 2005. And this is only the first 50 seconds of the episode. The word perfection doesn't do justice to how perfect this pre-credits recap is. The first shot of the episode is absolutely gorgeous and tells us so much. This shot of Gallifrey, which is a very sharp contrast to how we last saw it in Sound of Drums, tells us that this is amidst the war. As we see all the Dalek ships in the ruins of Gallifrey and we see the snow globe-like design of the Citadel destroyed and smoking, we know that this is in the final days of the war. And the shot of Rassilon and the others walking through the ruins also exemplifies the struggle of the Time Lords. And this story shows us how they were basically driven to villainy and madness in the final days of the war. Something that is really interesting is its sort of narrative perfection for the Time Lords, as it was the direction they were always heading. The Time Lords have been a massive part of the show, and honestly something that Classic Who failed at a lot. The Time Lords in Classic started off pretty well before we even met them, because we knew the Doctor distanced himself from them because he disagreed with the society and he was scared. And the first time we see them properly, in the War Games, they are big and all high and mighty and they kill the second Doctor. But after that, besides from the evil Time Lords, which I'll talk more about later, they are mostly just shown as incompetent bureaucrats. They lost that punch and fear factor shown in the War Game, until we see the corruption in Trial of a Time Lord in the most infamous scene from that story, where the Doctor denounces the Time Lords.
Power Pack conspirators, Daleks, Sontarans, Cybermen. They're still in the nursery compared to us. 10 million years of absolute power. That's what it takes to be really corrupt.
And this shows us that the lesson of Gallifrey is that if they get power, it leads to corruption and danger. Sound familiar? My point being that the Time Lords were always leading to this evil, and they've never been done better than they have here. And Timothy Dalton's explosive performance really sells the idea of evil, corrupt Time Lords. He's the most threatening villain throughout this entire story, and his madness and power are shown incredibly well in the story. I also really like the design of the room where the Time Lords are sitting, as it shows us the idea that the Time Lords are being as far down in the Citadel as possible, hiding away in the shame of the shadows below the mess they've caused, powerless and weak. And we see the brilliantly realised Visionary actually strike fear in the high and mighty Rassilon. And Timothy Dalton performs the fear and denial of defeat perfectly. And I love this woman's description of the Time War, as it adds so much more lore to the Time War. And it links back to the Master. She tells us that the people who die in the war get resurrected and brought back to life just to die again, which is really fucking morbid. And this does give a great explanation as to how it went on for so long. It really was a travesty of life, and Rassilon's denial of accepting defeat shows us some brilliant acting from Dalton. And just thinking that this man who went mad with power due to corruption is leading the Time Lords through the war is extremely interesting. Joe Dixon also shows us how much fear Rassilon strikes into the other Time Lords here, as we see this little bit of acting from him, which shows us how long it takes him to build up the courage to tell Rassilon they're survivors of the war. Bigging up this already super threatening villain even more. And then even more tension rises when he says Earth will bring salvation, boosting up the recurrent theme of the end of time itself. And then we see the Earth, and as we zoom in on it, we can hear some demonic master cackling, before the god comes back to our screens. As we go to the Master and the Doctor, for the first time in this episode we see what the Master race is like. And I've got to say, dated green screen unit aside, this is really interesting, as it establishes the Master's power extremely well, as he's basically turned the entire planet into a weapon which he could potentially rule the universe with. And this raises a great dilemma for the audience, wondering what's going to bring the end of time itself. Is it going to be the Master weaponizing the entire planet? Or is it going to be Rassilon and the rest of the corrupt Time Lords? This dilemma makes the story super engaging to watch and makes us wonder how it's going to be stopped and what it even is. And I love John Simm's expressions between the shots of the Master race. It shows his Vainglorious really well, as it shows us how mocking and cheeky the Master is about his victory, knowing that he managed to gain control over the entire planet by using some genius manipulation techniques. And his expressions toward the Doctor in particular act as a sort of addition onto his smugness shown at the end of part 1. And I really enjoy watching the Master indulge in his victory towards the Doctor, as it shows their love-hate relationship really well, because this continues what he was doing in the Series 3 finale, and that's one-upping the Doctor, and in this scene he knows he's achieved that completely. And Wilf, trying his best to defend the Doctor, shows more of their great relationship, as the Master mockingly calls him the Doctor's dad and Wilf says he would be proud of. This little back and forth leads into a fantastic scene later which makes their relationship a billion times better. And the Master's response to this really makes him a lot more threatening, as we see him strike fear into Wilf with words alone. The Master has never had as much threat as he has in this episode before. And when Wilf's phone rings, the dread that must be going through the Doctor and Wilf's head must be extensive. The dread shown in Wilf's face is really well performed by the second most lovable old man in fiction. And the Master is really keeping up the threatening tone when he's talking to Wilf. Simm's harsh voice works extremely well at accentuating how much the Master despises humans. It's almost as if the mere thought of talking to them makes him sick. And I love the little bit where he takes out the gun and throws it on the floor, as it shows so much for the Doctor and Wilf. When it cuts back to Wilf, we can see a little bit of shame in his eyes, knowing that the Doctor doesn't approve of guns and would never want him or anyone else to take one. Something that plays massively later on. And we see the Doctor puzzling on why Wilf has a gun and why he didn't just kill the Master. Something that also plays really well later on. And all of that was established in about 3 seconds. Art! And when the Master picks up the phone, John Simm nails the look of shock but still threatening at the same time. And when Donna shows up, my god, we see the true stakes and threat the Master race behold. Even though we already have, but you know, it's still brilliant. As the phone gets tracked almost instantly and we see an army of Masters arrive to kill Donna. And the Master suit really underlines how horrific this could end for Donna. The beloved Donna Noble, one of the greatest companions to grace the show, is about to be eaten alive by a horde of man-eaten Masters. The shock and terror of this is truly next level. And we see more of Donna starting to remember the things she saw with the Doctor, and this boosts the adrenaline and suspense in the audience even more. Because as the Doctor said, if she ever remembers him, her mind will burn and she will die. And as the track peaks, we see this explosion of energy come from Donna's head, relieving the audience, as we now know that she's safe and the Doctor had planned to keep her safe all along. This is fantastic, as it shows truly how much the Doctor cares for Donna, even if he had to do that horrific thing to her. And I forgot to even mention the best part of the whole scene. The Master in a bow tie. Yes. Just yes. It's perfection. And once that scene is over, it allows for a great bit of downtime for the audience, giving us a chance to see more of Sim and Tennant's brilliant relationship and chemistry. And before I talk about that godly scene, can I just say what a missed opportunity it was not having the Master and Donna in the same story where they meet. Seriously, imagine the absolute chaos that these characters would be like on screen together. It would be hilarious. And I love how after Donna lets out the burst of energy, the Master instantly knows that it's the Doctor. And the Doctor, still unable to speak at this point, just gives the Master a cheeky wink. Almost in response to the Master's wink at Wilf before. Even though he couldn't see it, but still. I believe that these two know each other so well that the Doctor knew what the Master was doing even though he couldn't see his face. And then, once the Doctor can speak, we get some of the most beautiful dialogue ever spoken from this character as a whole. It starts with the technique I talked about in part 1, the strategy of talking over someone to avoid talking about the subject that you don't want to talk about. In case you forgot, in part 1 it's shown when the Doctor is trying to help the Master with his condition, and the Master starts rambling about Christmas dinners, the most genius thing that I'd vent my frustrations into. This time around, the Master is trying to progress his plans by acquiring the TARDIS, something that would be extremely dangerous for the Master to have given the current situation. And this time around, the Doctor is once again appealing to the Master's better nature.
If the history between us means anything to you.
I do believe you're appealing to my better nature. And we both know I don't have one.
No, not you. You can go fuck yourself. Because unlike the Sacha Master, the Sim Master actually has a lot of depth and isn't just a one-dimensional villain. And this is one of the best scenes showing his character. It starts with the Doctor talking about how brilliant and wonderful the Master is, but he could be so much more, and how it would be an honour for the Doctor to travel with him. And this could have been brilliant to see if it ever happened. And this also starts the story's theme about honour. Now usually I don't talk about themes, unless they are integral to a story's brilliance or just really well done and delivered. And the theme of honour in this story is excellent. The Doctor's honour to the Master's eventual honour to the Doctor's honour to Wilf, and Wilf's honour to the Doctor make these characters some of the greatest in all of fiction, as it shows a new level of profound respect between all these characters, making them, even when in vulnerable or bad positions, easy to sympathise with and respect as characters. Especially since that respect is put to the extreme test throughout this whole story for all of them. And this scene shows the Doctor's honour to the Master extremely well. And the look on the Master's face when the Doctor is talking to him about this is absolutely fucking perfect! We can see in this one facial expression alone a new level of respect between these characters. The Master actually listening to the Doctor and hearing out his proposition of becoming good. Something we previously saw in the last part he completely ignored. And we see more of the Master almost begging for help with the noise, wondering what he would even be like without it. While it's a burden and a curse on his life, it's also become such a big part of him, he would almost be lost without it. And that line of thinking applies massively into the Doctor's next line.
Wonder what I'd be without you.
This is single-handedly one of the greatest lines in the episode and the show as a whole. This means so much for the relationship between the Doctor and the Master. It establishes more of the love side of their relationship. Because despite all of the differences and mistakes made in their relationship, they are the only thing remaining from Gallifrey. They both have nothing else but each other. Or so they think, anyway. And if they work together, they could become proper friends again. This episode alone is the reason why Missy's arc exists. If this episode didn't do so much for the Master and the Doctor's relationship, then Missy wouldn't even exist as she did. And I love the Master's reaction to what he says here as well. John Sim conveys so much here. We see how genuinely touched the Master is by this statement. Almost to tears, he's that heartwarmed by it. And we see for a brief second him considering it. Considering joining forces with the Doctor. Before we see him trying to get his act back to normal and being calm and saying yeah in response. Confirming to us that the feeling of respect is mutual here. And it's just so fucking good! And you know what the worst thing is about this scene? Is the fact that practically every review I've seen of this story or discussion I've had about the Sim Master, every single person who feels negatively towards him fucking ignores this scene, which adds so much depth and character to him. Like, what the fuck? How the fuck? No other master has had a scene which adds this much to the character and makes them so much more interesting. The amount of information conveyed to us in such a natural and flowing way makes this one of the greatest scenes in the show's history. I'm going to be saying that a lot in this video, so prepare yourself. Because this episode has some of the greatest scenes in Doctor Who history.
Keep watching, Doctor. This should be spectacular.
After that godly scene of character work, we get another about what the Time Lords did to the Master, and how he went insane by looking into the untempered schism, a gap in the fabric of reality. And this works as some great establishing scenes and character scenes. As we see the tactic the Doctor used talking to Wilf in the cafe scene where he was talking about how he was going to die almost just in pure spite of himself. This time around, the Master is unpacking about how the Time Lords took him as a child to look into the schism and they ruins his life. And the track, A Ruined Childhood, really does help the scene as it boosts the sympathy for the Master loads. And also this scene also shows more of Rassilon's scheming when he says the beat is the heartbeat of a Time Lord, hinting onto us early that maybe the said symptom of insanity was left over by Rassilon, and that could be how the Time Lords return to get their salvation on Earth. This is great as it adds more mystery to the story and creates more intrigue. And then the Master realizes the potential that the Noise could achieve now, and this is a scene that marks a lot for their relationship. Besides the fact that moments ago we saw the best of the mutual respect between the two, and even some of the love-hate relationship, when the Doctor suggests helping with the Noise, that starts to go downhill as the Master realizes what he can do. This scene acts as one of many scenes of massive revelation and realization, just like the Wasteland scene in part 1. This time around the Master realizes that he can track the signal and the origin of the drums, and this obsession ruins his chance of friendship with the Doctor. And even the Doctor starts to realize that it's going downhill from here, as you can see in David's brilliant performance, as he asks the Master what he's shocked about. And the Master's failed resurrection is still affecting him, as we see in this scene. He's still really unstable because of it. So he's going to use whatever methods possible to get a result as quick as possible. So that's why he threatens to kill Wilf, so he can use the Doctor as much as possible. And John Simm's performance here is really threatening and he kills it here. However, this ruins the potential friendship the previous scene was leading up to because of the Master's obsessive need to find the origin of the drumbeat and be important. He loses that chance of friendship. Until later on in the actual best scene of the episode. More on that later. When the Master slaps the Doctor has lost hope for their friendship. Almost entirely. As he's just tried his very best to convince the Master and he has shown his good nature, but he still chooses to not stand with him and tries to kill Wilf, ending the downfall of potential with the Master being knocked out and the Doctor and Wilf chaotically escaping. You can even see the face of giving up on the Doctor's face as he's slapped, and David's subtle bit of acting here was fantastic. And here, Wilf is showing his extreme loyalty as he would die for the Doctor's cause. Something that adds even more onto their already brilliant relationship, establishing more underlying respect, and something that makes the scene later on so tragic, as the Doctor has to die to save Wilf's life. And after that tragic scene of failure, we get the chaotic escape itself, which acts as a little thrust back into the action. It starts off comedically with the Master being knocked out and we get a comedic joke from the Vin Voce.
God bless the cactuses! That's cacti. That's racist.
And the Doctor being wheeled away is also very comedic and it leads into some funny moments. Yet, besides the comedy, the threat of the Master is still shown extremely well as the clones of him are everywhere. And the music intensifies the threat of them immensely, and seeing all the clones all over the mansion and in suits of armor once again exemplifies the threat and power the Master has. And when they get into space, Wilfred's reaction is pure gold, making him even more lovable than he already is. Which is impressive considering we're talking about Wilfred Mott, and the shot of space pulling back from the ship shows us how massive and new this must feel for Wilf. and the Doctor's aggressive shouting for them to hurry up, put next to the Master's frantic searching, once more exemplifies the Master's threat of having control over the entire planet, seeing as the Doctor has to essentially destroy the ship to get away from the Master. The Master's willingness to kill the Doctor in these scenes works well in two ways. On one hand, it shows more of his desire to be important, thinking he can do this himself without help, and on the other hand, it could have been part of his plan and more so playing to the side of wanting to fuck with the Doctor by one-upping him, by having him stranded in space. Because we see the Master later on open the transmission so he can gloat to the Doctor about his victory. This scene creates a lot of engrossing character depth, as we don't know the Master's true intent between these two options, which make it really interesting to watch. Especially since we know at this point the chance of friendship is almost fully gone. And if the Master was to kill the Doctor, or the Doctor to kill the Master, it would have been in this story, and this creates massive enthrallment for the audience. When the Doctor blows up the controls in the flight deck, it creates massive tension for the audience. What the What was that timing? Guys, it's confirmed. Jack is gonna fucking save the day. Bruh, my alarm went off. Why is it my alarm goes off during the filming of videos I'm so hyped for? Happened with the Series 7 ranking. Man, it happened when I was filming Timeless as well, but I cut it out because I was on a genuine rage during that video. Anyway, when the Doctor blows up the controls in the flight deck, it creates massive tension for the audience. As we are left in pure silence, waiting for something to happen, this creates massive suspense for the audience as we are left wondering if the Master's gonna find them. And this also marks a tragic point in history, as the last chronological time the 10th Doctor uses a sonic screwdriver. I say chronological because I know some big brain in the comments will be like, he used it in Day of the Doctor. Like, yes, I know. I love the way the Master reacts when his clones shoot the teleportation beacon so the Doctor can't get back. Because you can see in John Simm's brilliant performance that the Master wanted this, but at the same time, he still wants to appeal to the Doctor and needs him. And we can see this also in Tennant's brilliant performance when he's just staring dead-eyed at nothing. We can see this in his expression. The Doctor is solemnly considering giving up. A direction which is super interesting for the Doctor as a character, because he's a known optimist, but seeing this character considering giving up shows us how truly fucked the situation is. And Wilfred's reaction to this makes it all the more heartbreaking, as Wilf is the character who looks up to the Doctor and sees him as a figure who never gives up and never loses hope. And Wilf is seeing the Doctor in this state of mind is really depressing to see. And Bernard Cribbins absolutely kills the look of realization. This sharp contrast in expression is a lot like the brilliant cafe scene in part 1. And the Doctor's look of defeat and his almost blank expression is an absolute gut puncher of a shot. David Tennant absolutely kills still looks like that all the time, and this one really deserves more appreciation.